Hey everyone, in this lesson we are going to look at the moon, and we're going to look at two things about the moon. We're going to focus on the different phases of the moon and then what happens when the moon or the earth block each other and create eclipses. All right, first thing we need to know is what is happening in space with all these objects. So on this slide here, you obviously see the sun in the center. And then you know that us here on Earth, that we orbit the sun. So orbit is represented by this blue line here, which just means path around the sun. So we orbit the sun or revolve around the sun. And then we know also that the moon orbits around us. And so this white path here would represent the moon's path or orbit around us here on Earth. All of this is happening because of the force of gravity. So gravity pulls on objects and pulls them towards their center. So the sun is pulling on us, and then we on Earth are also pulling on the moon. Now, one thing you may not be aware of is that even though the moon seems to shine at night, it does not make its own light. It is only reflecting the light of the sun. Really, think of the moon as a giant rock. If you were to go out in your yard and pick up a rock, it's not going to blind you by shining, is it? No. The moon is much the same way. It does not produce its own light. It only reflects the light of the sun. So really, think of the moon as a giant mirror. So that reflecting of the light of the sun is what creates moon or lunar phases. So lunar phases are the different appearances of the moon from Earth throughout the month. Now, one thing I want you to look at here is that it says the different appearances. So when we look up at the sky at night and see the moon and it's in different shapes, the moon itself is not changing shapes. It always remains the same shape. But because of the reflection of the sun and because of its revolution around us, it makes it appear as if it is changing shapes. Now, before we look at the different moon phases, there's two words you're going to see that if you know what they mean, it's going to make learning the moon phases a lot easier. The first word is waxing. So anytime you see a moon phase that begins with waxing, you know that that means the light on the moon is getting brighter or it's showing more. Think of it this way. If you were to go outside right now and wax one of the cars at your house, what would that car appear to do? Well, it would hopefully appear to get shinier or brighter, right? So a waxing moon phase means that more of the lighted side of the moon is showing. On the other hand, any phases that begin with the word waning means that the light is going away or it is dimming. So waxing phases means the light is growing on the moon. Waning phases means that it is going away. All right, so here's all the phases together. Of course, in real life, we never see them all together like this because there's only one moon. So we only see one shape each day. Now, one thing I want to point out that you can't really tell from this picture is where the sun is. Because remember, all this happens because the sun is shining and the moon is reflecting its light. So in this picture, the sun is actually over here shining this way. Okay, so when we understand where the sun is, then we can understand how this is happening. All right, so here's the Earth, of course, is in the center. The moon is going around us, and you'll notice here, this is kind of hard to tell that these are arrows, but that the moon goes around us in a counterclockwise revolution, means it goes against the clock. Okay. So we're going to start out with sort of the beginning of the phases. Now, in real life, again, because this is a cycle, there really is no ending or beginning, but typically you begin with this first phase called the new moon phase. Now, this phase actually, when you look up at the sky, it's really hard to see the moon, and then sometimes you can't see the moon. Because think about it this way. If you are standing here on Earth, see if I can draw a little person, and you are looking at the new moon phase. So that means you're looking this way. Well, guess what you're looking right into? You're looking here at the sun, aren't you? Right? And the sun is shining. Think of it this way. Have you ever been on stage and had to look out into the audience and there is spotlight shining on you? If you've ever done any kind of concert or performance or play of any kind, you know those spotlights, if you look at them, it's almost like they're blinding you. You can't see anything, can you? And so that's why the new moon phase here, when you're standing here on Earth and you're looking at the new moon phase, you can't see it because it is almost like it's being blinded by the sun. But once the moon continues in its revolution around us, after it leaves the new moon phase, it's going to start becoming brighter. And remember the word that means getting brighter? Waxing. So this first phase after the new moon phase is called a waxing crescent. So remember, waxing means the light is getting brighter. Crescent here refers to the shape, how it looks like a crescent. I don't know if you like to eat crescent rolls, but they are kind of that same crescent-like shape. Now, as the moon continues to go around us, the light is still getting bigger, but this phase is actually called first quarter because it is a quarter of the way around its revolution around us, and we can see a quarter of the moon. Now, I know that looks like half of the moon, but remember, all we're seeing is one side. So imagine there is a whole other back side to this flat picture here that we can't see. So really, the only part of it we can see is 1/4 of it. Now we continue going around. Notice that the light is getting bigger. So we're still waxing. So this one is called waxing gibbous. So waxing is referring to the light. It's continuing to get brighter. Gibbous in this case is referring to the shape. It's almost a whole circle, but not quite yet. So we continue going around and boom, we get to this halfway point. This is the brightest, the biggest the moon is going to look, and this is what we call the full moon. So this, if you'll notice, we're kind of halfway around the circle. This is as big as the moon's going to get, which means that as the moon continues to go around us, the light is not going to get any bigger. It's going to now start going away. So do you remember what we call that word where the light is getting dimmer? It is waning. So now we are waning. So waning refers to the light. It's going away. Gibbous refers to that shape where it's almost full. So we're continuing to go around the Earth. The light is still going away. But this time we are in the last quarter phase because again, we're only seeing 1/4 of the moon. Don't forget about the whole backside of the moon that we can't see on this flat screen. And then finally we end up, the light is just about to go away completely, and we call this waning crescent. So waning, again, remembers the light is going away. Crescent referring to that same shape that we kind of started with. And then it starts all over with the new moon phase. All of that we just saw takes about 27 to 28 days. Most places you'll see it referred to as it takes about a month. So it takes the moon about 1 month to go all the way around us on Earth. All right, now let's look at these eclipses, because sometimes when the moon goes around us, it gets into just the right alignment to create eclipses. So let's find out what they are. So an eclipse is when one object in space casts a shadow on another object in space. Think of all the things that are revolving and going around each other in space. You've got the planets going around the sun. Most all the planets have moons that are going around them, and even some other objects that are moving around in space. So anytime one of those objects blocks the light from the sun, it's going to cast a shadow, and that's what an eclipse is. So there's two kinds of eclipses we're going to focus on. The first one happens when the moon casts a shadow on Earth. That's what we call a solar eclipse. This is the one that we had about 3 years ago. You might have been able to experience or see it since it was so close to us here in Georgia. So what's happening here is you'll see that the moon has come in between the sun and the earth, and it's lined up in a perfect line. That means that moon is blocking the light from the sun, and you'll notice this gray area here represents the shadow that it casts on the earth. Now, solar eclipses, and you can see here, are very, very tiny, okay? So they're not going to affect the whole entire Earth, and that's why solar eclipses tend to be more rare, especially for the area that you live in. So that's why that eclipse we had several years ago was such a big deal, because it was one of the first ones we've had in decades here, even close to Georgia. And that's because solar eclipses, the shadow that it casts is a real tiny line, and the only people that can really see or experience that eclipse are the ones that happen to fall in that little shadow right there. So in this picture here, let's say there was a person up here. I'm not very good at drawing these people. Then this person wouldn't see it, because they are not in the shadow of that eclipse. This is what a solar eclipse looks like if you are standing on Earth. The moon has come into alignment with the sun and blocked out the light of the sun, almost kind of making it look like night in the middle of the day. Now the second kind of eclipse is just the opposite. This is when the Earth is now the one casting a shadow on the moon. This one we call a lunar eclipse. So just to clarify, in the last one, the solar, the moon was in between, in the middle, but now the Earth is. So now we're the ones blocking the light from the sun, and we're the ones casting the shadow on the moon. Now what you'll notice in this picture is that the shadow is much bigger than it was in the solar eclipse, right? Well, think about it. We are way bigger than the moon is. And so we're blocking out all the light from the sun, and it's casting a shadow on the moon. Now, a lunar eclipse is safe to look at. You don't need special glasses like you do in a solar eclipse. And a lot of the times the lunar eclipse kind of has a reddish tint to it, and it has to do with the color of the Earth and how it blocks out all the blues and the green light from the sun. And so what's left is it portrays this sort of rust color onto the moon. Now, some of you might have already started thinking about this, because the moon goes around the Earth, right? Every day, all day. We should have eclipses every month, right? Because if you remember from the moon phases, the new moon is when the moon is in between the Earth and the sun, and the full moon is when the Earth is in between the moon and the sun. So if you think about it, we kind of should have eclipses twice a month, one at the new moon and one at the full moon. But we don't. Why is that? The answer is because the moon's orbit is tilted 5 degrees. And so what that does, that tilt is what prevents us from having eclipses every month. And the reason for that is because it puts the moon just out of Earth's shadow. Let me show you what I mean here, and this is a little hard to see. If you'll look at this white line here, remember that is our orbit around the sun, okay? And you can kind of see that it's flat to the level or the plane of the sun. But if you look at the moon's orbit here, this red line, do you notice how it's kind of tilted up, right? And so that tilt of the orbit, not the moon itself, but its whole path, the whole orbit around us, is tilted 5 degrees, and so that prevents the Earth, the moon, and the sun from lining up in a single straight line every month.